On her first day working as a live-in nanny at the Greenwich estate of one of the most powerful families on the eastern seaboard, Merritt Winslow stepped into the main hall and stopped breathing. A portrait in a gilded frame dominated the far wall. Dark, sharp eyes looked directly out from the canvas. A jaw cut like something architectural. Precise. Unyielding. Short dark hair, neatly swept back. A face that wore authority the way other men wore expressions, without trying, without noticing. The face she had been looking at every morning for 4 years. On her son, the photograph frame slipped in Merritt's hands. She gripped it tighter without knowing she had done it. The portrait was enormous, life-sized. The kind of painting a family commissions when they want a room to remember who is in charge. And beside her, Kosta was still speaking, still moving through the formal introduction of the house, the history of the estate, the schedule of the children's wing, her voice measured and unhurried, the voice of a woman who had never once needed to raise it to be obeyed. Merritt heard none of it. There was only the portrait, and the ringing that had begun somewhere behind her eyes the moment she saw it. The man in the painting was him. The man who had walked into the hotel bar in Chicago on a rainy October evening and sat 2 seats down from her and ordered a whiskey without looking at the menu. The man who called himself Daniel, who spent 3 months making her believe that some people simply find each other, no explanation required, who learned that she took her coffee with 1 sugar and always remembered, who folded his jacket over her shoulders on a cold night outside a restaurant without making a performance of it, who kissed her temple each morning before he left, and then one Tuesday simply did not come back. No message, no number,
no trace.
as though Chicago had swallowed him whole and closed over the surface without a ripple. For years. It had been 4 years since he vanished. 4 years of building a life from the wreckage of his absence. 4 years of raising a boy alone, a boy with a jaw she recognized now with a precision that made her knees unreliable, a boy she had told, carefully, gently, and with as much honesty as she could manage, "Your father is a good man, sweetheart. He just had to go somewhere very far away." She had believed the first part. She had been less certain about the second. And now the father of her son was hanging in a gilded frame inside the mansion of an Albanian-American crime dynasty, looking at her with the same dark eyes Torin used when he was deciding whether to trust someone. Merritt's hands were trembling. She could feel the wooden edge of the photograph frame pressing into her palms. She turned to the woman beside her. Silver-haired, pearl necklace, forest green velvet, the kind of composure that takes 60 years to build and has never once, in all that time, been allowed to crack. Merritt turned to her, and she heard herself say the words before she had decided to say them. "Ma'am, why does my son look exactly like the man in that portrait?" Kosta went still. Not the stillness of surprise. The stillness of a woman who has spent a lifetime learning the difference between a threat and a catastrophe, and has just understood which one this is. Her eyes dropped to the photograph frame in Merritt's hands, then rose, slowly, to Merritt's face. The silence that followed lasted no more than 10 seconds. It rearranged everything inside it. If you want to know what happens next, press like to help this channel tell the full story. Share this with someone who needs to hear that the truth always finds its way home. And subscribe, because the next chapter begins now. The results came back before morning. Merritt was still awake when her phone lit up with a single message from a number she didn't recognize. "Come to the estate at 10. Bring the boy."
No greeting. No signature.
She didn't need one. She dressed Torin in his cleanest shirt, combed his hair twice, he protested both times, and told him they were going to visit Mama's workplace. Torin accepted this with the suspicious calm of a 4-year-old filing the information away for later interrogation. He brought the fox. He always brought the fox. The estate looked different in morning light. Larger, somehow. More permanent. Torin stepped through the iron gate, looked up at the full length of the main house, and said, with complete sincerity, "Mama, did a king live here?" "No, sweetheart." He considered this. Did a dragon? Before Merritt could answer, the groundskeeper's retriever came bounding around the side hedge, and Torin forgot about dragons entirely. He dropped to his knees on the slate path. Good shirt, no hesitation, and attempted to introduce himself to the dog with the gravity of someone opening a business negotiation. The dog licked his face. Torin accepted this as a reasonable response. Zana was watching from the porch. She stood with her hands clasped at her waist, perfectly still, in the way of someone who has trained herself not to betray what she is feeling while she is still deciding what that is. She watched Torin scramble back to his feet, brush the gravel from his knees without being asked, and then turned to examine a stone urn near the steps with the focused attention of a property surveyor. She watched him tip his head to one side when the urn's size puzzled him, a slow, precise tilt, the weight of his chin dropping left before he had a thought to offer about it. Zana's hands tightened against each other. Torin looked up, noticed her, and walked directly over with the confidence of someone who has never learned to find strangers intimidating. He looked at her seriously. "Do you have good snacks?" he asked. "Because the crackers Mama gave me were the plain kind."
No flavor.
Very disappointing. Merritt closed her eyes briefly. Something moved at the corner of Zana's mouth. Not quite a smile, but the place where a smile might eventually happen. She took him inside. At the kitchen table, she produced a plate of almond biscuits and a glass of apple juice and sat across from him with the composed attention of someone conducting a meeting. Torin ate 2 biscuits before the first question arrived. "Do you know your daddy's name?" Zana asked, her voice careful and even. Torin thought about this with his whole face. "Mama says he's far away." He picked up a 3rd biscuit. "She says he's a good man." Zana looked up slowly, across the table, past the boy's head, and met Merritt's eyes. The look held everything neither of them had said. Then she stood, took her phone from her pocket, and dialed. "Darden," she said. "Come home." She heard the car before she saw it. A low-engine note on the gravel drive, precisely controlled, the kind of sound that doesn't announce itself so much as simply arrive. Merritt was folding blankets in the nursery wing when it registered. She set the blanket down, stood still for 3 full seconds. Then she looked at her uniform. She wasn't sure when the decision made itself, only that by the time she was conscious of it, she was already pulling the navy dress off its hanger and reaching for her own clothes, a gray sweater, dark trousers, her own shoes. Not the help. Not today. If she was going to stand in front of the man who had disappeared from her life on a Tuesday morning without the courtesy of a single word, she was going to do it as herself. She walked to the main room. He was standing with his back to the door, saying something to Zana, his voice carrying the easy cadence of a man who had just stepped off a long flight and was still in the process of arriving. Dark suit, dark hair. The posture she had described to herself 100 times in the years since and never quite captured accurately, because memory always softens the details it finds most dangerous. Then he turned. The silence lasted less than 2 seconds. It felt considerably longer. His face did something complicated, recognition, disbelief, and something raw moving underneath both, and for a moment he looked exactly the way Torin looked when a situation exceeded his current processing capacity. Merritt didn't give him time to speak. "I gave birth alone," she said. Her voice was even, factual, the tone she used when she was holding something large very carefully. "There was no one beside me in that waiting room. Not one person." She held his gaze without effort, because she had been rehearsing this, without knowing she was rehearsing it, for 4 years. The night Torin had a fever in Hartford, my car had broken down. I walked him home through a February storm. He was 11 months old. I carried him the whole way because the stroller wheel had cracked that morning and I hadn't had time to fix it yet. Darden's jaw tightened. The morning he asked me why Tommy from daycare had a father at pickup, she paused. Just briefly. "I told him yours is far away, sweetheart, but he loves you." Another pause. I wasn't certain I was telling the truth about the second part. The room held the weight of that sentence. Then Zana spoke, from her chair by the window, with the calm precision of a woman delivering a verdict she has spent 2 days preparing. "You have a son, Darden. 4 years old. His name is Torin." He has your eyes and his mother's stubbornness. She set her tea down. He is currently in the kitchen teaching himself to open the biscuit tin. He has been at it for approximately 7 minutes. I expect he will succeed shortly. Darden turned toward the kitchen door. From somewhere inside it, there was a small, triumphant sound. They spoke in the study. Zana closed the door behind them without being asked, which told Merritt everything she needed to know about how long this conversation had been coming. Darden stood near the window, not sitting. The posture of a man who doesn't trust himself to be still. "My father had you looked into," he said. "Within 2 weeks of us meeting." He said it without softening it, which she respected, even now. It was standard for him. Every variable in my life got assessed. Everyone I spent time with. Everyone who might become relevant. Merritt said nothing. She waited. He called me into his study. Door closed. Told me to end it immediately. His jaw moved. He was specific about what would happen if I didn't. Not to me.
To you.
He looked at her directly. I knew my father. I knew he wasn't performing.
So I left.
I told myself it was the only way to keep you safe. That if I disappeared cleanly, he would have no reason to reach for you. The room was quiet for a moment. That's the explanation, Darden said. I'm not offering it as an excuse. Merritt had listened to the whole account without moving. Now she took a breath. You made that decision without asking me. Her voice was still even, still controlled. The same tone she'd used earlier, not cold, but precise, the way a surgeon is precise. You decided I needed protecting through disappearance. You decided what I could handle and what I couldn't. You thought you were being honorable. She paused. A lot of damage gets done by honorable men who don't consult the people they're being honorable at. Darden said nothing. Do you know what your honor cost your son? She didn't raise her voice.
She didn't need to.
4 years of drawing a father-shaped space in every picture he makes and not having a name to put in it. For years of me answering questions I didn't have honest answers to. She stopped. He told your mother you were a good man. He's never met you. He's giving you a character reference based entirely on things I said to protect his feelings. A 4-year-old is out there defending you. Think about that. Darden looked at his hands. The hands of the most powerful man in the room, doing nothing. The silence stretched. Can I trust that you won't disappear again? Merritt asked. He looked up. Don't trust my words. He said it without hesitation, which was, she realized, itself a kind of answer. Watch what I do. She studied him for a long moment. The face she'd spent 4 years trying to file away somewhere it wouldn't cause damage. She didn't say yes.
She didn't say no.
You can meet him tomorrow, she said. But understand something clearly, Darden. She picked up her jacket from the chair. He is not a consolation prize for your guilt. He is a person. Get that right from the first day, or don't come at all. She walked out. Behind her, she heard him exhale, long and slow, like a man who has been holding his breath for 4 years and has only just remembered he's allowed to stop. Torin knew something was happening. He didn't know what, specifically, but 4 years of being the only person in a 2-person household had sharpened his instincts considerably. He could read his mother's silences the way other children read picture books, by the shape of them, by what they left out. This morning's silence had a particular texture. Careful.
Braced.
He brought the fox. When Darden walked into the nursery, Torin was sitting on the rug with a fox in his lap and the expression of a customs official who has not yet decided whether to let this particular traveler through. He looked at Darden from the floor. Darden looked back from the doorway. Neither of them spoke first. Merritt introduced them with the focused calm of a woman defusing something. Torin listened, then looked at Darden, then looked at the fox, then back at Darden. A full assessment. The fox's opinion was, as always, kept private. For the next 30 minutes, Torin referred to Darden exclusively as you. Can you move? You're in a light. You're sitting on my red crayon. Does you want juice? Mama, does you think he wants juice? Merritt did not correct the grammar. She was choosing her battles. Darden did not crouch down with wide eyes and an enthusiastic voice, the way adults do when they are auditioning for a child's approval and know it. He did not produce a gift, did not perform. He simply crossed the room, sat down on the nursery floor, in a suit that had no business being on a nursery floor, picked up the nearest set of building blocks, and began to build something.
Quietly.
Methodically. The focused attention of a man used to constructing things precisely and not explaining himself while he does it. Torrin ignored him for approximately 90 seconds. Then the sideways drift began. Slow, unconvincing, punctuated by elaborate pauses in which Torrin pretended to be very interested in the middle distance. The fox came with him, tucked under one arm, its single glass eye facing Darden with an expression of mild skepticism. When Torrin was close enough to see the structure properly, he stopped.
He looked at it.
Tilted his head, that slow leftward tilt, the one that meant he was processing something that didn't quite add up. "That's a bad tower," he said, with the gentle authority of someone delivering a professional opinion. "The base is too small. It'll fall." Darden looked at the tower, looked at Torrin. "Show me," he said. Torrin sat down, took the blocks without ceremony, and began dismantling and rebuilding with a focused efficiency of someone who has been thinking about structural integrity for considerably longer than 30 seconds. They worked in silence for 20 minutes. No performance. No forced conversation. Just blocks and the occasional sound of Torrin exhaling through his nose when a piece didn't cooperate. When Zana called them for lunch, Torrin stood, tucked the fox back under his arm, and walked to where Merritt was waiting by the door. He considered his verdict for a moment. "He's okay," Torrin said. "He listens." From a 4-year-old who had spent 30 minutes calling a Manu to his face, it was practically a glowing reference. 6 weeks. Darden came every day. Not almost every day. Not most days. Every day, including the Tuesday it rained so hard the estate driveway flooded to the ankle, and he arrived with his trouser hem soaked through and said nothing about it, because Torrin had announced at breakfast that Tuesday was block day, and Darden had apparently noted this and treated it with the seriousness of a board commitment. The arm's-length formality dissolved the way ice does, not all at once, but steadily, without a single moment you could point to and say there, that's when it happened. Darden learned the ranking system. This was not optional. Torrin had developed a comprehensive hierarchy of his stuffed animals based on criteria that remained, to adult observers, largely opaque. The fox sat at the top, unchallenged and apparently unchallengeable. Below him was a rabbit with one ear, elevated above the others for reasons Torrin described, as he has been through things. Third was a small bear with a missing button eye who held his position through what Torrin called seniority. When Darden had asked, with genuine curiosity, what seniority meant to a stuffed bear, Torrin had looked at him with the patient exhaustion of someone explaining something for the second time. "He's been around the longest."
"You respect that."
Darden had nodded. "Fair enough." Merritt had watched this exchange from the doorway and felt something shift quietly in her chest that she chose not to examine too closely. Then Zana invited them to Sunday lunch. Not the kitchen. Not the cottage at the edge of the grounds where Merritt and Torrin had been living. The main dining room. The long table with the good china and the crystal that caught the afternoon light and scattered it across the ceiling. The seat at the table's left that had been Darden's place since childhood, which Merritt knew because Zana had mentioned it with a particular casualness of someone communicating something they want you to understand without appearing to say it directly. Torrin arrived in his good shirt, which he had agreed to wear under protest, and only after the fox was consulted and deemed unbothered. He sat in the chair Zana had adjusted for him, a cushion added, footrest positioned, and spent the first 3 minutes conducting a thorough examination of his fork. Turned it over, checked the weight of it, looked at the pattern on the handle with the focused attention of a small archaeologist. Then he looked across the table at Darden, at his hands, specifically, resting against the tablecloth. Large, square-knuckled still. Torrin looked down at his own hands, then back. Your hands look like mine, he said. Straightforward. Observational. The way he might note that the sky was a particular color. Darden looked down at his own hands. Then at Torrhen's small ones, spread flat on the white tablecloth beside his plate. They do, he said. Torrhen nodded, satisfied, and returned to his food.
Case closed.
Matter resolved. He reached for his bread roll with the hand in question and moved on entirely because he was 4 years old and lunch was also important. Merritt pressed her own hand flat against the tablecloth beneath the table's edge, out of sight. She held it there until it stopped shaking. She noticed it on a Wednesday. A dark sedan, parked 40 meters from the daycare gate, on a stretch of curb where parents didn't typically stop because the angle was wrong for pickup. The driver was angled toward the gate rather than the road. Merritt clocked it the way she clocked everything, quietly without changing her pace, filing it under note this rather than act on this. She collected Torrhen, who had opinions about the snack situation that afternoon, and needed the walk home to fully air them. On Friday, same sedan. Same position. Same angle. Merritt stood at the gate for 4 seconds longer than necessary. Long enough to read the plate. Long enough for the driver, if he was paying attention, to know that she had. On Saturday morning, she stopped at the corner shop for Torrhen's breakfast roll, a ritual he treated as non-negotiable and she had stopped arguing with, and the woman behind the counter leaned forward before Merritt could reach for her change. Someone was asking about you earlier this week, she said, her voice low. Man in a good coat. Very polite. She paused in the way of someone who has lived long enough to know that very polite men asking questions about young mothers and their children are not a good sign. Wanted to know which child was yours, what time you came, whether anyone else ever did pick up. Merritt's hand was still on the counter. What did you tell him? Nothing useful, the woman said. I've got grandchildren. I know how to answer a question without answering it. Merritt bought the roll. Walked Torrhen back to the cottage, settled him with the fox and his blocks. Then she stepped into the kitchen, closed the door to 11 centimeters, and called Darden. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She gave him the facts in sequence. The sedan, the plate, the Wednesdays, the man in the good coat, the questions, the same way she'd given him the facts of the past 4 years. Clearly, without performance. When she finished, she waited. He arrived within 20 minutes. But the man who knocked on the cottage door that evening was not the man who sat on the nursery floor in a ruined suit, patiently learning a stuffed animal ranking system from a 4-year-old. This version was different. Jaw set, eyes cold and absolutely still, the kind of still that isn't calm but is the thing that exists just before action. He sat at the kitchen table, listened to everything once more without interrupting, and then made a single call in Albanian. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. There is a register of quiet that is more frightening than volume, and Darden had clearly been fluent in it for years. He ended the call. Merritt looked at him across the table. If this is what being near you means for my son, she said, I will take him and go somewhere no one can find either of us. I've done harder things than disappear. He held her gaze.
No argument. No reassurance.
I know, he said. He stood and walked out. Torrhen chose this precise moment to open the kitchen door, fox in hand, and announced that he was hungry and also that the fox was hungry, and they had both agreed that crackers were unacceptable at this point and something better was required. Merritt looked at her son, his father's jaw, her own stubborn eyes, and felt the full, unreasonable weight of loving someone you would burn the world down to protect. She got him something better. He made the first call from the car. His lieutenant, Benny, was driving. He had worked for Darden for 11 years, through negotiations in rooms with no windows and decisions that didn't get written down, and he had learned early that the most important skill the job required was knowing when not to speak. He did not speak now. He kept his eyes on the road and his opinions, whatever they were, entirely to himself. Darden called the head of the Marco organization and spoke for 4 minutes. He conceded the New Haven corridor, every contract, every arrangement, every dollar of revenue the territory generated. in exchange for a single condition.
Permanent non contact.
Not a truce. Not a cooling-off period.
Permanent.
The kind of agreement that, in the world both men operated in, meant something considerably more binding than a legal document. The Marca had agreed. Of course he did. The New Haven corridor was worth more than the leverage a 4-year-old boy represented, and they both understood the arithmetic. Darden ended the call. Said nothing.
Benidorov.
The attorney's office was in downtown Greenwich. Darden was inside for 3 hours. Benny parked across the street, bought a coffee from the all-night place on the corner, and sat watching his employer's silhouette through the conference room glass. Still, deliberate, the posture of a man working through something with complete intention rather than reluctance. Documents produced.
Signed.
Moved aside. More documents. 3 hours of dismantling, page by page. The network his father had built over 30 years and handed to him like an inheritance he hadn't been asked whether he wanted. Benny did not ask questions he already knew the answers to. When Darden came out at 20 minutes to 2, he carried a folder under one arm and a rolled tube of architectural drawings under the other. He looked, Benny thought, like a man who had just set down something extraordinarily heavy and was still recalibrating to the new weight of himself. Cottage, Darden said.
Benidorov.
The light in the cottage kitchen was still on. Darden knocked once, quietly. A consideration for the sleeping 4-year-old on the other side of the wall, which Benny, watching from the car, noted with the private acknowledgement of a man witnessing something he hadn't expected to see. Merritt opened the door. She had not slept. He could see it in the set of her shoulders, not exhaustion, but the particular alertness of someone who has been waiting to find out what kind of night this was going to be. He set 2 things on the kitchen table. The folder of transfer documents, the roll of drawings. He unrolled the drawings and weighted the corners with her coffee mug and the salt shaker because the table was too narrow. A house in Westport. 2 stories. A room on the south side with large windows and a wall painted a specific shade of blue, noted in a margin in his handwriting with the manufacturer's code beneath it. Merritt looked at the notation, then at him. 4 weeks ago, he said. Torin pressed his face against a hardware store window on Elm Street and pointed at a paint chip on the display rack. He paused. He said, "That one, Mama. That's the right color for a sky." Another pause. I went back the next morning and wrote down the number. Merritt looked at the drawing, at the room with the south-facing windows and the sky-blue wall, at the small notation in the margin that meant he had been paying attention, quietly and without announcement, to the things her son loved before he had any right to. She didn't speak immediately. Outside, in the car, Benny finished his coffee, looked at his employer's silhouette through the cottage window, and allowed himself the smallest possible smile before he looked away and gave them their privacy. The house was finished on a Thursday in late November, when the last of the maple leaves had given up entirely and the Westport sky sat low and pale above the water. Torin walked through the front door, stopped in the entryway, and looked up at the ceiling the way he looked at things he intended to take seriously. Then he tucked the fox more firmly under his arm and began his inspection. Room by room. Methodical. The expression of a 4-year-old property surveyor who has standards and intends to apply them. He assessed the kitchen. Acceptable. He examined the living room, pressed on the sofa cushions twice to test their structural integrity, and moved on. He opened a hall cupboard, looked inside for reasons he did not share, and closed it again. He was, Merritt thought, the only person in the building conducting himself with any real composure. She was gripping her own coat sleeve and pretending she wasn't. When Darden opened the door to the sky-blue room, Torin stopped. The easel stood in the corner, angled toward the light. The window seat overlooked the garden, bare-branched and quiet in the November afternoon. And beside the window, built from pale oak and sanded smooth, was a small wooden stand, low, narrow, exactly the right dimensions for a stuffed fox of specific size and considerable dignity. Torin stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then he walked to the stand, placed the fox on it with both hands, and adjusted the position once. Adjusted it again. Stepped back and examined the result. The fox looked out over the room with his usual expression of measured judgment. Torin turned around. "He has his own spot," he announced, with the deep satisfaction of someone whose most important logistical concern has been permanently resolved. Darden crouched down and held him, and Torin, who had spent 5 weeks deciding whether this man was trustworthy, allowed it with the ease of someone who has made his decision and filed it away. His small arms went around Darden's neck. The fox watched from his stand and withheld comment. Merritt stood in the hallway and gripped the door frame. Her knees were unreliable. She didn't mind. Zana arrived in the afternoon with no announcement, which was, Merritt had come to understand, simply how Zana moved through the world. She carried an antique silver frame, heavy, intricately worked, the kind that belongs to a family rather than a purchase, and inside it, a photograph taken 3 weeks earlier at the estate. Torin in the green velvet chair, chin lifted, fox on his lap, his grandfather's eyes and his mother's expression, looking out at the camera with the same composed assessment. Zana placed the frame in Merritt's hands. Then she kept her own hands there, over Merritt's, for a moment. Said nothing. The pressure was brief and certain, the kind that means something has been decided and does not require words to make it final. It was enough. It was more than enough. That evening, after the sky blue room had done its job and Torin was asleep with the fox on his dedicated stand and his breathing coming steady and soft through the monitor on the hall table, Darden stood at the living room wall with a small frame in his hands. Inside it, a torn corner of a Chicago hotel notepad. For years worn soft at the edges, the paper slightly creased, the ink faded to the color of an old bruise. On it, in handwriting he had looked at more times than he could count, a single word. Merritt. The thing she had written on a hotel notepad 4 years ago when he asked her name, because the bar had been loud and it was easier to write than to shout. The thing he had kept in the inside pocket of every suit he owned from that night until this one. Carried through board meetings and long flights and hollow Athens nights when he sat by the window and looked at it and understood, with the specific misery of a man who made a decision he can never fully unmake, exactly what he had walked away from. He hung it on the wall beside the photograph of the 3 of them at the Westport Harbor, taken the week before. Torin in the middle, fox under one arm, his free hand in Merritt's. Darden on the other side, Torin's small hand finding his without being asked, because that was simply how things were now. Merritt stood at the window. The garden was dark, the first lights of winter coming on across the water, the harbor quiet and still below the house that had been built from a paint chip number written in a margin and a decision made at 2 in the morning in a conference room. Darden came behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. They stood together in the dark and the quiet, in the house that belonged to them, listening to the monitor on the hall table and the steady, unbothered breathing of a boy who had a sky blue room and a fox with his own spot, and a father who had burned 15 years to the ground and showed up at 2 in the morning with the receipts. "We lost 4 years," Merritt said. His arms tightened slightly. "We have a lifetime ahead." She looked out at the water, at the lights coming on across it, one by one, patient and certain in the early dark. And this time, for the first time, she let herself believe it.